Good evening to all the participants and our respected scholars. Today we invite Professor Regis Lanneau for the first session of the day. Professor Lanneau has made remarkable contribution in the field of law and economics. He has served as an associate professor in the University of Paris and as a lecturer at CAM and Sciences Po Paris. He has also penned the epistemological foundations of law and economics movement and had made several publications in the field of law and economics closely related to public business law, regulation, and economic analysis of law. We are glad to have you on board, sir, and you may start with today's session. And again, I'm very sorry for the delay.
Sure, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here. And as you know, it's not my first time teaching for GNLU and the GNLU Center for Law and Economics. So thank you to have me here. I really hope that you are going to enjoy today's and tomorrow's class because actually we are just going to address the same topic, which is constitutional law and economics. Please do not hesitate to ask a question. I might even ask you to participate from time to time. Okay? So if that is clear, today we are going to address a bit of constitutional law in economics. And I will start with something that is a Calvin and Hobbes video because cartoon, because I truly believe that these Calvin and Hobbes cartoon is revealing what we are trying to do when we are doing constitutional law. Despite the fact that I'm pretty sure that this is not necessarily how constitutional law has been taught to you. And if you are looking at Calvin in here, you can see that what Calvin really would like to be is to be a tyrant, right? And indeed, you always have a risk if you are giving all the power to someone, that this someone will behave as parents. And you can consider that his mother, actually, by intervening, is trying to be some time of a check on the power that Calvin is having. You will fully understand this cartoon only at the end of this class and next class. So if we're thinking about constitutional law, I mean, for most of you, you are lawyers. And for most of you, when you are learning about constitutional law, you are learning about answering these type of questions. Like, what is a constitution? I'm pretty sure that most of you can try to answer this question. If I'm asking what is the content of the Indian Constitution, I'm assuming that most of you can tell me the number of article. You can tell me about the number of section. You can tell me maybe about the content, maybe not of each and every article, but at least of some of them. If I'm asking you about the fundamental right that you have, if I'm telling you about the limits of this or that right, for example, freedom of expression or economic liberties, maybe you will have the possibility to answer these type of questions. And if I'm asking you what the Supreme Court decided in this case, you are going, yeah, you can answer this type of question. And at many levels, you can say, well, that is my job as a lawyer. My job as a lawyer is just that. My job as a lawyer is, or as an academic, will be to describe the law. My job as a lawyer will be to use the law. My job as a lawyer will be to understand what the Constitution really means, right? And at many levels, this task is unescapable. And once again, for most of you, when you did constitutional law, or when you are learning constitutional law, this is more or less what you are doing. You are learning the content of the Constitution. And that is a traditional or the traditional approach of constitution. What I will show you just a little later will be that, yeah, there are some other approach of constitution, and probably if we are looking at constitution this way, something will be missing. Okay? So as lawyers also, and I'm assuming that the case for most of you, if that's not the case, please intervene. Like as most of you, you are going to believe that, well, if you are a legislator, if you are a judge, if you are the prime minister, your job is to promote the general interest of the people. Your job is to promote social justice, right? You will believe, and I'm pretty sure of that, that the rule of democracy is majority voting. And as long as a majority vote for this or that law, then that's the rule of the democracy, and everybody should abide by this type of law. You might believe also that because you have partisan debates, because people in the parliament are talking with each other, it will be possible to implement good policies, or at least better policies, than if you did not have any opposition at the parliament. You can also believe that the purpose of the constitution is also to express an ideal. And if you are looking, for example, at the preamble of the Constitution of India, like it's pretty clear that you're expressing this ideal, you're expressing tones of ideal. What we want is social justice. Okay. What we want is liberty for all. What we want is equality, right? And that's obvious. Actually, I was recently listening to a podcast about the Indian Constitution, and the Indian scholar said that, well, in the Indian Constitution, we try to put everything that we were considering to be good in other constitution. And like that helped me a lot to understand indeed this Indian Constitution. And quite often, when you are addressing, I don't know, problems, or when you are looking at the decision of a Supreme Court of India, you are going to present your own ideology, you are going to make some normative statements, and as a lawyer, your job when you are commenting will be to give your opinion, right? And then this is what we are calling a doctrinal approach of things. So until now, of course, we are not talking about economics, and until now, certain people are saying, okay, that's exactly what we are doing. So the question is, what exactly is missing in this approach? And what is missing in this approach, at least for me, but once again, if you disagree with that, please intervene. What is missing is that for most of you, you know what is in the Constitution. You do not necessarily know why we have what we have, or why it would be good to modify things. You know, for example, what is a Constitution. But if I'm asking you, why do we have Constitution? Can anybody answer that question? If I'm asking you, what is bicameralism, you will answer. You will say, okay, that's two chambers in a parliament. Okay, but why do we have that? And not monocameralism? What are the consequences of that? You have a rule in India that is first past the post. What is the consequences of that? Why not using what they are using in Mauritius? That the three first past the post could be something interesting. Okay? You know that we have a democracy, you are believing that democracy is something good, but why do we have democracy? Why do we have judicial review? Right? If you are truly believing that democracy is perfect, then judicial review is pointless because all the problem will be solved. Right? Why are we using a majoritarian rule to make choices and not unanimity or supermajority? And I'm convinced, but maybe I'm wrong, that for most of you, these are not necessarily questions that you were asking yourself. Or for some of you, even worse, you are going to consider that these questions are irrelevant questions because after all, we are lawyers. And as lawyers, our job is just to know what is the law. As lawyer, our job is not necessarily to answer these type of questions, right? So the traditional approach, and that's my issue, is that it's offering a certain picture, but it's not offering the full picture. And if you are not understanding the full picture, maybe you are going to make a mistake in the way you are going to appreciate, for example, the characteristic of a constitution, in the way you are going to look at different rights which are supposed to be granted by the constitution, in the way you are going to appreciate, for example, judicial review, in the way you are going to appreciate certain doctrines that, for example, the Supreme Court created, like the basic structure of the Constitution. Like, why was that relevant? What is the problem with that? Okay? Up to what point can we consider that because I created that, it will have an impact on the separation of powers? Like, these questions for me are extremely, extremely important. Like, just learning the what without learning the why is an issue. And I'm 100% convinced that if you attended the different session of this workshop, you know that the people we're talking about law and economics were insisting about the why. Why do we have property law? Why do we have tort law? Why do we have contracts? Why do we have constitution? And this question is probably way more interesting. And same thing, if you're looking at doctrinal approaches, most of the time they are hiding their premises. They are hiding their ideology. And sometimes they are not sufficiently consistent or they are not systematic. And you're saying, like, I am going to give you certain opinion, but it will be without a methodology, which is, I believe, quite problematic. The second thing that is missing is that most of the time, when we are doing constitutional law, we are considering that certain things should not be questioned, or like certain things as so obvious that there is no point to question them. When you are hearing Lincoln saying democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, you are saying yes, and I agree with that. My question is, okay, why is that? Is it really the case? You are assuming that judges are here to serve justice and find law. Is it the case? Up to what point is it the case? You are believing that government is intervening when it is beneficial to society. Is it the case? Because, I mean, when I'm looking at everyday experience, I know that, yeah, if you are a judge, you can be corrupted. If you are a member of parliament, you can be corrupted, right? If you are an official, you can be corrupted. I know also that lobbying exists, that certain firms are going to seize the government and they are going to try to obtain special benefits, right? And that exists. I think that for most of you, one of the examples that you love to use is Geo Telecom. A lot of people are saying, probably there were some lobbying in that. Okay, same thing. If you are looking at judge, if you are looking at regulatory agency, you are saying, oh yeah, they are here to implement law and all these things, but sometimes they are following their own agenda, right? If I am not wrong, the Supreme Court of India said, like, you need my approval if you want to approve some new judges, right? And yeah, like, if you're a politician, you can be self-interested. Like, my purpose when I'm a politician is to be elected or to be re-elected. And certain people are ready to do a lot of things to be elected and re-elected. Like most of the shows presenting Indian politics, for example, I mean, they are showing politicians as being self-interested at many levels. So maybe something is missing. And what is quite interesting is that law and economics could help you to conceptualize things differently, right? And I will start with a question. This question is relatively easy, I'm assuming for most of you, but yet I really would like to have your opinion. Like, why do we have a state or something that is called a state? You can participate, do not hesitate to participate, either through the chat or by unmuting yourself. So why do we have a state? Nobody really? So why do we have something that is called a state? So I have one person, so Sriram. So to have a government territory, then I have carry out coordinated economic function, I have governance, law and order. Okay, but if you are looking, if I'm not wrong, or for guaranteeing rights, okay, that's something that is quite interesting. Of course, it's possible to criticize that. Like, for example, like, why do we have a state? Do we need necessarily a government for a territory? I mean, you are in India, you know that social norms are very, very powerful. And that sometimes you are fearing way more peer pressure and social sanction than government sanction. And you know that because of that, actually, you are ensuring law and order, right? You do not necessarily need a government for that. I'm encouraging you, for example, to go outside. Let's say you're going to Ahmedabad and try to talk with the people who are selling stuff and try to ask them whether or not, for example, they are using contract and contract law, whether or not they have property rights, and whether or not property rights are really enforced. And you are going to see that it's not necessarily the case. But that is not necessarily telling me why I have a state. Like, do I need really a state? So I have some other people. State give us identification. Okay, state secured by rights, social welfare. Oh, I even have society need a leader. From an economic point of view, you are going to see that the answers that I'm going to give you is disappointing. What is a state? Or why do we have a state? We have a state for a simple reason. State is just a technology to produce certain goods. Okay? It produces public services, it produces public goods, and it is taxing you in order to provide these type of goods. Okay? That's what I'm doing if I'm the state. I'm nothing more than that. So if you are saying that I'm providing social welfare, you are considering that social welfare is a public good, and I'm going to tax people in order to provide that. You want defense or security, I am going to consider that it's a public good, and you are going to pay for that. You want to have a legal system that is working, I am going to provide that. That will be a public service. And in exchange, you are going to give me money, right? That's what is a state. But let's look, or let's go a little farther away. All economists and all of you, you will agree that without a state, certain goods and services are not going to be provided at an efficient level. For example, goods which are non-excludable, you will always have a risk of free riding. Let's assume that I'm telling you when you are filling your taxes to say to which programs you want to contribute. That will not necessarily work. So defense, so I have a question like defense is a public good or a public service? You can consider that actually a true public service should be linked to the fact that it is a public good. Or a true public service will be a service most of the time that should not be excludable. If you are thinking at defense, for example, it's non-excludable, so you have a risk of free riding. If I were asking you, do you want to contribute? And you know that your neighbors are going to contribute, you are going to say, okay, I will not contribute because anyway, it will be provided and I will benefit from national defense without having to pay for it, right? That's something that is pretty clear. And in here you have a traditional representation of that. So it's not, so what do we have? We are in a situation in which the question is whether or not I will build a fence. Just assume a village, and in that village you have, let's say, two family or two groups, and you have to decide whether or not to fence the village. You know that if you are fencing the village, like safety will be ensured, which is a good thing. But you know that if you are not contributing to that, maybe the other person is going to contribute to that. And look at that. Like what is going to happen if, for example, one person, you know that they are going to contribute to build a fence. Then you have a choice. Either I'm not going to contribute and I will earn 3.5, or I will contribute and I will earn 3. In that case, I will prefer not to contribute. If the other person is not contributing, you are going to say, well, I have a choice. Either I am contributing or not contributing. If I'm contributing, I'm earning 2. If I'm not contributing, I'm earning 1. Yes, this game is not a prisoner's dilemma. And actually, the problem that you will have is, what are you going to decide? You want the other guy to pay. You would be better off if the other guy is going to pay, right? But if you are not paying, and if you're not paying, if both of you are contributing to the fence, both of you would be like quite good. If both of you are not participating, it will be horrible. So then you will decide to intervene in this type of situation. If you are the state, you can solve the problem relatively easily. What are you going to say? First, we are going to vote on whether or not you want a fence. And second, I will say that if you voted for building a fence, I will tax everyone for building a fence. And from that point of view, I can escape this problem, right? Is this clear for everyone? Is it making sense for everyone? Yes, no? No question? So I'm moving on. All economists are also going to say that, well, certain laws are required for an economic system to function properly, like property law, contract law, economic liberties. Like what I've learned, for example, and I'm sorry I might criticize India, but in India you have something that is called property law, right? But you know that property disputes can take ages to be solved, like something like 40, 50 years, sometimes even more. What does it mean? Am I incentivizing people to try to buy property? Probably not, especially for renting or something like that. I would incentivize people to buy property if and only if they are buying property in an area in which, for example, they know that their property will be respected because they are coming from a family that is well known and well respected in that area. But are you going to invest in an area that you do not know? Probably not. And that is generating tons of problems. If you have like property rights which are well defined, which are well enforced, I will incentivize you to invest. I will incentivize you to do more. Same thing with contract law. Contract law is just a technology that will help you to deal with stranger. And for most of you, you know that. Most of you, you know that the caste system is also working as a mechanism of enforcement of promises. Because you know that if you are not fulfilling your part of the contract, the full community will know about it. And that's not necessarily something that you want. So because you want to preserve your reputation and to protect your reputation, you are going to do what you are supposed to do. And that's the reason why, if I want to deal with someone, I prefer to deal with someone from my own community because I know that social norm will be there to make sure that you are going to fulfill your part of the contract. Economic liberties, that's also something that is very important, right? And it's because you have the economic liberty to, for example, um, try to do the type of job that you want to do, that nowadays you are at the law school. And that's something that is obvious. So at many levels, you could say that the state, because of its intervention, it can actually lower transaction costs. It can facilitate things. And this approach is an approach that you are finding, for example, in Hobbes and the Hobbesian state. And I'm saying I have a choice between stealing and not stealing. And what will be the result? I will say that, well, if I know that you are not going to steal, I might have an incentive to steal. And if I know that you are going to steal, I will have an incentive to steal also. The problem of that world is that we are not going to produce a lot of things. So because the state is going to enforce some time of a security, you are just blocking this cases in which one is stealing and the other is not stealing. So now the choice is either to steal or not to steal. And in that case, you prefer not to steal, right? Is that clear? Do you understand that? Well, what the state is just a machine that is producing certain goods. Most people will, I hope, agree with that. But the question that we have is something that is very, very, very different. The question that we have is, okay, the state can produce certain goods, that is for sure, okay? But the question that I will have is, okay, what are the type of goods that I need to provide centrally? And what are the type of good that I need to provide by the market system? If I'm using the state, I'm opting out of the market system, and I prefer to rely on a centralized non-market institution, like the central state, municipality, or what you have, for example, a panchayat, okay? And you are going to say that because I'm producing these goods, people are going to be better off, right? But then the problem that we have is that we have to choose in group. Of course, you could say that the purpose of choosing in group is to improve the welfare of the society. But the question that I'm trying to solve when I'm doing constitutional law is precisely this one. When I'm trying to solve, when I'm doing constitutional law, I'm trying to ensure that, like, how are we going to decide what we are going to produce? How are we going to decide how we are going to distribute the costs? Because that's what you are doing when you are doing constitutional law, right? And that is all. So the democracy, you could say, that's a system, or the constitution is what? The constitution is just a system that is trying to determine like what we can produce and how we are going to share. And that you would agree that many people might have very different ideas on what we have to produce. Certain people should say that we need to redistribute more. Other people are saying we need to produce more infrastructure. Some other people are saying we need to invest like a lot in our judicial system in order to have a legal system that is working pretty efficiently. And that will be what you want, right? So think about that. Like, we consider that the state can improve things. Sure, no problem. My question is, how are we going to decide together what the state should produce? Of course, for most of you, you would prefer to be a dictator, because then you will decide for everyone what should be produced and how to share the cost. But then we might have a problem, which is like, how do you know that what you believe is the general interest? If you are considering, of course, that the purpose of all these type of things is to promote the general interest. Okay? Sometimes you have procedures, like you do not necessarily need procedures and you are going to decide together like relatively easily. Like if you are in a family, you are going to decide without having the constitution of your family. Or you are going to say that the constitution is an unwritten constitution. That's a possibility. But if you are more than 1 billion people, how are we going to decide what to decide or what to produce? And that is a really, really interesting question, I believe, right? Okay. And that is what we are doing regarding constitutional law. And the economic logic will start with that. Then what will be the thing that will be interesting? How are we going to decide? You're going to say, let's think about an ideal world. How should we decide what to produce? And you might have heard about John Rawls and his theory of justice. I think that's 1971. And he said that ideally, to decide how to decide and to determine the procedure that we have regarding constitutional law, we need to decide under a veil of ignorance. Okay? What exactly does it mean? Imagine that you do not know whether you're rich or poor, whether you are belonging to a high caste or a lower caste, whether you're strong, whether you're weak, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman, whether you are living in a city or in a countryside, right? What is the type of institution that you are going to design? Okay. And the thing that is quite interesting is that if you are doing that, naturally, if it were possible, of course, you are going to decide in a very disinterested way. You are going to say, I could be in the best position possible or in the worst position possible. So what will I want? And John Rawls, in the theory of justice, said, like, I believe that people, if they had to choose under a veil of ignorance, will adopt certain rules. These rules are relatively easy. So first is the principle of equal liberty. We are going to look at what it means. And the second principle is actually the difference principle, or the principle of fair equality of opportunity. And you are going to see the difference between the two. First, Rawls is saying, just assume that you do not know who you are, where you are, what is your position in the society. I'm pretty sure that what you will want is a scheme of basic rights and liberty for all. And you have, of course, basic right and liberty, which are going to be compatible with the basic right of liberties of other people. Like, if you do not know if you are going to be a man, a woman, an intellectual, a rich, a poor guy, you are going to say, what I want is what? First, I will want freedom of thoughts, liberty of conscience, right? Because I do not know whether I will belong to the minority or to the majority. I will want to have some political liberties. I do not want people who are going to decide not to take into account my opinion. I will want freedom of association, right? I will want to have some rights if I'm deprived of my liberties. I want to have a protection of the integrity of my person. I do not want to have the possibility to be killed, for example, right? And of course, I want the rights which are covered by the rule of law, which means that when you are applying a law to me, I need to know what is the content of the law. So the law should be published, the law should be clear, the law should be prospective, the law should be the one that is being applicable. The law should not command what is impossible and all the things. And for most of you, you will also agree with the fact that you want to have the right to have a property, right? And if you are trying to do this mental exercise of, like, you do not know if you are going to be a man, a woman, a rich, a poor person, you are coming from a rich family or poor family, you do not know if you are very smart or very dumb, you will always want that. That seems almost obvious, right? And I'm assuming that for most of you, you would agree with that. And Rawls is saying these are the basic liberties for all citizens. And I'm pretty sure, by the way, that probably I will find some form of that in the Indian Constitution. Some political liberties, like the right to vote, the right to be eligible for public office. I will have the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly. Of course, up to some point. I do not want to have hate speech. And of course, some people might not like the fact that you are free to say what you want to say. I will want liberty of conscience and freedom of thoughts. Liberty of conscience means also liberty to choose my religion, for example, and to believe what I want to believe. I want to have the freedom regarding my own person. Like, I do not want to have the possibility to be sent to jail without a trial. I want to have the right to hold property. I want to be free from arbitrary arrest and seizure, which is something that is making full sense, right? So one of the first thing, if you are following Rawls, if you are following this ideal stuff, one of the first things that you are going to do when you are designing your constitution will be to secure these rights. And securing these rights means what? It means that the state, because it is a state, because it is powerful, can be also a predatory state, can be a state that will destroy your liberties. It can protect your liberties. That's pretty sure. But it can also oppress you. Okay? That's the reason why I gave you the Federalist Paper number 51. Okay? And why? Yeah, sure. Like, if I were 100% sure that the people who are going to decide for us are angels, problem would be solved. But it's not the case. So I want to secure at least these liberties. And I want to make sure that it will be difficult to modify these liberties. And that's what I want. Then Rawls is saying, well, it's possible because, of course, we are in a society in which actually it's impossible not to have inequalities, right? But inequalities should satisfy two conditions. First, they should be attached to position and offices open to all under condition of fair equality of opportunities. So I do not want to say that because, I don't know, you are coming from a very important family of Gujarat, you are the only one who will be allowed to run for election, right? I want everybody to have this possibility. I don't want that your position will be determined by just like where you were born or in which family you were born. I want everybody to have at least fair equality of opportunity. Of course, that's something that is difficult. And by the way, Amartya Sen, when he's talking about capabilities and all, is relying on John Rawls and he's relying on this one. The second principle that you have, or the difference principle, is that when you are doing law regulation or designing a system, you should pay an extra attention to the people which are the least advantaged people. I know that my system will produce inequalities, but for John Rawls, under a veil of ignorance, everybody will understand that you are morally obligated to improve the worst off, unless it would make everyone worse off. For John Rawls, you should not just maximize the size of the pie. For John Rawls, you should make sure that the slice that the poorest of the poor are going to benefit from is bigger before than after, for example, your regulation, right? And you can try to do that, like try to use John Rawls, try to think about the Indian constitution, and try to consider whether or not these or that rules would have been adopted under a veil of ignorance, right? And that's something that is quite interesting. Of course, and I agree with you, you're going to tell me, well, this system should be based on reason. And probably, if we're deciding under a veil of ignorance, when we are voting also, everybody should have the possibility to say that indeed this system is a good system. And I'm assuming that you would believe, as I am believing, that this approach is relevant, that this approach is intellectually very, very attractive. Like this mental experiment that you can do when you are saying, I need to decide under a veil of ignorance, is something that is, for me at least, quite fascinating. Okay? But the problem is that this approach is quite unpractical for one obvious reason. Okay? You cannot choose under a veil of ignorance. You know whether you are a man, whether you're a woman. You know whether or not you are coming from a rich family or a poor family. And of course, when you are going to vote, when you are going to decide on procedures, you are going to prefer the procedures that are going to benefit you and not necessarily everybody. I can say that to make sure that everybody will be better off, I should use unanimity. But that's not necessarily something that we are using in our democracies. And why aren't we choosing that? We are not choosing that because it's just too costly to implement, right? And moreover, I will have a problem. Like unanimously, if I want unanimity, it means that also each and every new individual being born in India should approve the Constitution of India, which probably is quite problematic and quite difficult to implement. Okay? And the problem is also that I'm understanding why John Rawls is saying when he's saying you have a right for free expression, freedom of association. Yeah, but what should be the content of the rule? Like in the detail, not at the abstract level. I'm interested in the detail of the rule and what should be these rules, right? Because if from John Rawls, and if everybody is following John Rawls, and if everybody could decide under a veil of ignorance, then how would it be possible to explain the diversity of constitutional rule? We should have the same rule all over the world, right? We should have the same way to protect rights. We should have the same rules regarding the Supreme Court, same number of Supreme Justice, same way to analyze the law, same way to think about the law. But the question is that what we are observing? Absolutely not. Most of the time, we are not using unanimity. We are using, for example, majority. Most of the time, we are observing like huge differences. And like in India, you have one very specific constitution because it is the longest constitution in the world, right? So why did you decide to have that long a constitution? Why didn't you decide to have a shorter constitution, right? And that actually is a problem that you have. So it's possible to go back to the fundamental problem. And what is the fundamental problem? Once again, the fundamental problem is for certain things, we have to choose in groups. What will be the rules that we are going to use to choose in group, right? And not that if the general interest could be calculated, if the general interest could be like a mathematical problem, probably democracy would be pointless, right? I just need to have experts in solving these problems who are going to solve these problems. And if the experts are making mistakes, like making mathematical mistake, some people will know that and some people will criticize that, right? That's something that is quite interesting because you are going to say that in certain domains, for example, we are not relying only on the parliament. We are relying also on experts because we're saying that's a matter in which expertise is the most important thing, right? Think about a dam, for example, and security of a dam. Like, if you are a lawyer and if you are like me, you have no idea about that. Think about the safety of a plane. If you are like me, you have no idea about that. And most of the time, you are not going to let the parliament decide about that. You are going to create, for example, an independent regulatory agency that is a specialized agency to solve this type of problem, right? The good thing also is that if the general interest were something that was objective, then political beliefs would be irrelevant, right? Because whatever the political belief that you have, the solution is this solution. So the reason why we have actually a democracy, or we have the system that we have, it's because I do not know what is the general interest. If it were possible to know that, problem would be solved. If, for example, you are a firm believer and the president of your country is God, or what you are considering to be God, or superior being, or whatever, obviously you are going to say, do I need the separation of power in that case? Do I need constitutional review in that case? Do I even need like a real constitution? Because this person is God. He or she knows better than me what is good for me. And I accept that. And I'm understanding that. So of course I will accept that. And indeed, if you are looking at a religion, religion is not based on democracy. It's based on dictatorship. God is telling you what to do, for example, right? And this is, by the way, what you are finding in the Madison paper you had to read. And in that Madison paper, they were saying, like, if men were angels, then problem would be solved. I would not need anything. If angels were to govern men, problem would be solved. The problem that we have is that we're not governed by gods. We're just governed by men. We are just governed by normal people. And of course, people are just people, right? And if we are believing that we are governed by men, and that the general interest cannot be identified objectively, then things are getting way more interesting. Because then you're going to say, how do you know that what you are going to promote is the general interest? How do you know that what you are going to promote is not your own agenda? Right? And that's something that is quite fascinating because now I'm understanding what I'm doing when I'm doing constitutional law. When I'm doing constitutional law, I am trying to determine rules to decide in matters in which there is no scientific solution. Okay? So somebody is telling me, but isn't the basic premises of economics that people are self-interested? Okay, so I will just answer that. The basic premise of economics is much more that people are not behaving randomly. And I will have a tendency to believe that if you behave the way you behaved, it's because you had an interest to do so. When I'm saying self-interested, it could be many things. Like if I'm acting and I'm truly believing that I'm promoting the welfare of the country, and this is something that for me is important, I will still behave with self-interest by trying to promote the general interest, right? But the problem is, what is this general interest? And I cannot define it mathematically. It's not solving a mathematical problem. And that's the reason why I need a constitution, because a constitution will help me to determine how we are going to choose, knowing that indeed people are people. They can be good, they can be bad. I do not know. What I'm going to say is just that, well, they are going to behave how they are behaving, probably because they have an interest in doing so. And that's a way to look at how they are going to behave, right? And that's all. So all problems would be solved also if it were possible to identify a decision procedure that would automatically interest. If it were possible to identify a procedure that would allow to aggregate individual preferences in a rational way, problem would be solved, because then I will look at the aggregation of preferences and I will try to maximize the utility of the society. But the question is that for most of you, you are believing that this is what democracy is doing. The reason why we are voting is because we are believing that in that way, it will be possible to aggregate individual preferences, right? And that's how you are justifying democracies. But my question is this one. Is it really the case? Is it really because I'm voting that the result of the vote will match the general interest? And quite frankly, I'm not sure. Like, I have my doubt about it, right? Do you understand that? Yes, no? Is it clear for everyone? Do you understand the problem that we are trying to solve? And by the way, notice that if you are perceiving constitutional law in this way, constitutional law is extremely, extremely fascinating. Because then you are going to say each and every rule that I have will have an impact on what we are going to decide. Of course, things will be different if I'm saying unanimity, or if I'm saying supermajority, or if I'm saying normal majority. That's something that is quite fascinating. Or at least to me, that's something that is quite fascinating. For most of you, and if I'm following rules, I told you, I will believe that I need to have the possibility um, to participate in political decision. So in a way, I want some form of a democracy. But how do I know how to vote in a democracy? How do I know that instead of first past the post, it would not be better to have like a first round and a second round in an election and not first past the post? How do I know that first past the post is better than three first past the post? How do I know that on certain stuff, I should not, I don't know, vote using a principle uh, of proportionality, for example? And that's so much more interesting when you're doing constitutional laws this way. Okay? And in a democracy, you are going to say, I want everybody to have the possibility to vote. That's what John Rawls told us. Okay? But of course, if you are voting, you also want to have some form of political competition. Like when I was in China, I'd ask them, how are you deciding on your leaders? And they told me, we're electing them. I said, yeah, really? And they told me, yes, but there is only one candidate. If you have only one candidate, what is your power to have an influence on the election? None. You need to have a political competition. You need to have different people presenting different things, different programs, different political programs, different view of what the Indian society should be. And then during the election, I'm going to ask people, okay, what do you want? What is the project, the society program that you want to endorse? And that's what you want. I also want that a shift in the preference of a voter will have either no effect or a shift in the same direction of that shift. What exactly does it mean? If somebody is switching from Congress to BGP, I'm saying either it will have no impact or it will have an impact in that BGP will obtain more seats. That's all. And same thing. If you are moving from BGP to Congress, I'm going to say either it will have no impact, so right now BGP is in power, or it will have an impact in that Congress will obtain some power, right? The problem that we have with that is that there are many, many, many different voting procedures which are going to satisfy all these requirements, right? Do you understand that? Is it clear? Yes, no, you don't know. Okay. Because Itesh, I'm supposed to stop in 5 minutes. That's what you told me, like it's 1 hour. Yes, no. Okay. So
The session continues till 6.
till 6, so I have another half an hour. Sorry, 15 minutes,
Yes, sir.
right? Okay. So I have Sriram who has a question. Or does it matter in voting? Poll promises, anyways, non-obligatory on the ruling party. Yeah, of course. So in here, you are touching something that is quite interesting. When I am voting, what I want is to incentivize you to follow your promises. Okay? If I know that the voters are stupid people and that anyway they are not caring about whether or not you fulfill your promises, then of course, as a politician, I'm just telling you a dream, a way to look at the society. My question will be something that will be slightly different, and that's something on which I will insist tomorrow. I agree with you. Okay, that's a problem. Voting will not make sure that politicians are going to enforce their promises, of course. And probably it's not wise to make sure that the politicians are always enforcing their promises. But my question will be something that is slightly different. When you are in power, how can I be sure that you are not going to use the power of the state to benefit, like to make sure that you are going to benefit from it, your family is going to benefit from it? How am I making sure that you are going to consider at least a bit the general interest? And voting is a system for that. Because if you are really behaving like wrongly, badly, or whatever, I have the possibility to intervene by saying, I will not vote for you anymore. And if people are still voting for people that you know are corrupted and all, then it means that, yeah, that's democracy. You prefer this type of people. That's sad, but that is the rule of the democracy, right? Do you understand that? Yes, no? And right now, we are going just to assume that. I'm going to assume that, well, we are in a democracy, and let's assume that politicians are going indeed to enforce their promises. Okay? Then what we will have to choose is which program will be the best for India, for example. And I have many, many ways to decide about that. Okay? And I'm going to present you 5 different social procedures. Let's assume that you have to vote on, I don't know, where the railroad will be, or what is the railroad that you are going to repair, or to maintain, or to improve. I have the possibility to use the Condorcet method. Condorcet method is saying that I will choose A. If A is winning against B, if A is winning against C, if A is winning against all the other options possible that you could think about. Okay? For example, when you want to amend a law, I will say that the amendment will be adopted if it will be preferred to all other amendments that could be considered. Of course, it will take time to use this procedure, but I mean, intellectually, that's a possibility. I could also say, well, I'm going to ask everyone to pick their preferred amendment. And the amendment that will be adopted will be the one that will appear as at the first place of each, at the first place of the most number of individual list. That's one option. Third option, border count. I will ask you to rank the different amendment for the most preferred to the least preferred. And let's assume that you have 5 different amendments. I will say that the amendment that you prefer will get 4 points, amendment just after 3 points, 2 points, 1 point, 0 point. I will add the number of points, and then I will say, okay, the amendment with the most number of points will be the amendment that will be adopted. I can use the air system. I will ask you to rank the different options, and then I will eliminate the options which are not preferred. And slowly, at the end, I will just have 2 options, and out of these 2 options, I will choose the option with the most number of votes. I can use what we are doing in a democracy, sequential pairwise. To choose between A, B, C, D, E, I will do A against B, the winner against C, the winner against D, the winner against E, right? My question is that, what is the best procedure? How are you going to choose between these different procedures? What should you consider when you are choosing between these procedures? Is it possible to identify a procedure that will each and every time identify what is the general interest? Do you have any answer to this question? Which one is the best? Is it possible to say that one is better than another? Because, well, in a democracy, we're choosing, in general, social procedure number 5, sequential pairwise. Is it fully making sense? I could also use unanimity. So, somebody saying fairness of the procedure. Do you think that there is one of these procedures that is not a fair procedure? And why? Because fairness, I'm not sure that I know what it means. So, and Shriram is saying, is this like a referendum? It could be a referendum if I'm asking all Indians to decide, or it could be at a local level. Okay, Satna is telling me sequential pairwise. Okay, why? Why is it better than the board account, for example? You have difficulties with that, so let me help you. Just assume that you have 7 voters. In India, you have way more than a billion, okay? You have 7 voters. You have voters number 1, voter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You just have 5 options, A, B, C, D, E. Voter 1 prefer A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E. Voter 2, A to D, D to B, B to E, E to C, right? You understand how it's working? What is the option that should be considered as the social choice? Is it possible to say that one of these options will obviously promote the general interest? And that's for you to tell me. So, considering that you are a good student, considering that you are believing in the general interest, considering that you know what is good for the society, please let me know, in this society with just 7 people and 5 options, what is the option that the society should adopt? A, B, C, D, or E? And of course, why? Because you are a lawyer, so you will have to justify why. Anybody? Or you are very scared to talk? So Dhruv is saying majority review of the results. I'm not sure to fully understand what you mean by that.
If you may allow, may I speak, sir?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting is that considering the voters 1 to 7, that the person who gets the most vote for the first position, like in this graph, that is A for the first position, he's getting 3 voters vote for a position for A place. So he should be elected out of all the 7 for the first place. Whereas D should be selected for the second place because he is getting the most votes of 3 again. So this is what I was suggesting. That based on the voters positioning of a candidate on a certain position or a place, they should be selected based on the majority of it.
Okay, so you are saying the only thing that you are considering is what is the preferred choice of voters. And if I'm looking at the preferred choice of voters, by the way, that's procedure number 2, you are going to say, well, 1, 2, 3 are saying that A is what they prefer. 4, 5, 4 and 5, they prefer C, voter 6B, voter 7E. A should be adopted. But then
Yes, sir.
certain people are going to tell you that. They're going to tell you, yeah, but I mean, voter 4, 5, 6, and 7, look at how they are ranking A. Actually, they really do not like A. If I'm looking at people regarding, for example, B or D, like you do not have one of them that is ranking B or D at really the last. It's never the least preferred option. Why not considering that? No?
Yes.
And moreover, if you are saying that we're choosing A, I will tell you, look, if I'm asking people to vote, do you prefer A or do you prefer B? I will have 4 people who are going to prefer B, 3 people
Over
who
it.
are going to vote to prefer A. So, like, how can I choose? How can I decide what this community, which is a very small community, should choose, right? Do you understand the problem?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because this problem is a problem that you are going to solve with constitutional law. With constitutional law, you are going to say, okay, how are we going to decide between A, B, C, and D and E? We are going to decide according to certain procedures that we are going to adopt. And if we're adopting one procedure over another, then maybe I'm going to change the results. But by the way, if the result depends on the procedure, then you cannot say that the result is the general interest, right?
Okay, sir.
Do you understand this idea?
So somewhat
I'm
yes,
not just talking
but it
to
is
prove,
still
by
a
the way.
bit confusing for me, because when we are considering social aspect of it, not the economic aspect of it, then we are going for the societal development. But when we incorporate the economics in the constitution, then the factors that changes are the money that comes into the play.
No, think about that. That's exactly the same thing. What am I going to put in the Constitution? How am I going to decide what to put in the Constitution? I
Okay.
need to determine how we are going to adopt the Constitution. Who is
Okay.
going to draft the Constitution? Who is going to review the Constitution? What will be the procedures that we are going to adopt to vote for the Constitution? Think about that. If I'm saying that the Indian Constitution should be validated by referendum, but I do not want 50% plus 1, I want 70%. Probably the content of the Constitution will be different,
Okay.
right?
Right, sir.
But if the content of the Constitution is different, then how do I know that this Constitution is the best Constitution that I could have had?
Okay, sir.
Do you understand the problem we have?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this problem for me is one of the most interesting problems that we could have, because then you are going to say, well, if the procedure that I'm choosing, and I will tell you that tomorrow, there is no procedure that is a perfect procedure, which means that certain laws and certain regulation will necessarily be inefficient, because it's impossible each and every time when we are regulating, when we are adopting a law, to pick always the best decision, okay, or the best option. Is that clear to everyone? Because I'm seeing that Professor Allen is here, and I'm seeing that my time is almost over. So tomorrow I will start again on that. So Sriram was saying law can be efficient, but what about justice? Okay, sure, no issue. Tell me about justice regarding option A, B, C, D, and E. Which one is a just procedure? Which one is a just choice? Is there one procedure that is a just procedure? I'm not sure. And probably your concept of justice will be different from the concept of justice that is my concept of justice. And accepting that, that's already something that is important. Okay? So tomorrow I will finish that. And tomorrow, and I'm sorry because I will break a bubble, I will tell you that the general interest does not exist. So let's stop talking about that. What constitutional law is trying to do is not to promote the general interest. It's trying to do something else. But that is the teasing for tomorrow.